Hi again then guys, and welcome to another look back to the world of Gran Turismo 6, once again into one of the most popular categories of race car in the game, of course, the Le Mans prototypes. The modern prototypes on this occasion, not Group C. Of course, Group C is my personal favourite of the Le Mans prototype eras. This one though is post-2000s. Of course, the 2003 Le Mans winning Bentley Speed 8. Most definitely a fan favourite, and a car which I believe I've said a couple of times I believe does have a pretty strong chance of coming back because it was already a premium. In particular, of course, in GT6, a lot of the cars that were premiums have been brought back in GT Sport because a lot of the PS2 era stuff would doubtless require more of an update, whereas these ones, I guess, not so much. Now, this one is one of the very few closed cockpit prototypes to have a fully detailed interior, which is very nice to work with, and you'll see some of that footage, of course, in this video. Now, as far as this car being a fan favourite, I know that tons of people would love it if this car came back. In Group 1, in Gran Turismo Sport, it would be a fantastic car, a great rival. It would kind of nestle somewhere between the cars that we currently have though, so I think if they did bring it back, they'd probably bring it back alongside maybe one or two other prototypes at the same time. Because, again, we've kind of seen a precedent of that. The 3 Super GTs come together each time, the 3 Group C cars came together, etc. So I'm not sure what they'd bring it back with. The obvious choice would be the Audi R8, maybe the R10 because it was already a premium. But as far as this car's success, as far as what it can do in Gran Turismo, and also what you could expect if you haven't driven it, maybe GT Sport is your first game and you're just watching this because it's on the channel, what could you get from this Bentley if they were to bring it back? Well, it's a closed-top prototype for a start, as you can see. Personally, those are always my favourites. They tend to have a better top speed in real life. In the game, the open tops are still pretty good. This one was always one of the fastest prototypes in Gran Turismo in a straight line as well. Top speed is very good. The power is very high as well. It's got a 4-litre V8. For those who don't know, it is mechanically based on the Audi R8, which pretty much won everything that this car didn't win in the early 2000s. And that 4-litre V8 engine puts out 1,079 horsepower in its peak tuned form. Now, you're also looking at one of the highest torque outputs, which is very impressive as well when you remember that this is not a diesel. This is still the predominantly petrol era, even for Audi, of the early 2000s, and with that in mind, 1,002 pound-feet is massive. And again, of course, that is with the full turbo kit, oil change, completely upgraded, but that's a massive amount of torque. It's actually one of the torquiest prototypes in the whole game. In fact, like literally top 3 or 4, it's crazy. The weight is 900 kilos, which is not surprising at all. The horsepower per tonne is massive, a fraction under 1,200 horsepower per tonne. Again, of course, that's in its peak tune. And in terms of the speed that I mentioned earlier, around a track, it's not necessarily the sharpest handling of things, but it was still very popular. Now, I'm not going to go so far as to say it's like a Jag XJR9, which is kind of smooth but a little bit dull because of its age. Not that it's bad, it's just not quite as sharp or as responsive as a newer prototype. This one, though, is a new prototype. It just happens to be a bit heavier through corners. It's certainly not as responsive as a Pescarolo, for instance, and I would argue it's not necessarily as smooth as an Audi R8. But it's a very good all-rounder. It's got excellent acceleration, very good top speed, really good specs, and very smooth, just not as smooth handling as the Audi. Overall, the car did win at Le Mans as well, so it kind of proved what it was capable of, and there are plenty of cars in the game in the prototype category that have never won Le Mans, and they're still great, so the fact that this one actually did just works in its favour. Now, as far as pricing, it's up there with the best of them, 1.9 million, no surprises there. And in terms of what it can do around the track, well, as I said, it is a fan favourite, and fan favourites tend to be such for a reason. Now, I'm not going to lie and say that this thing can, destroy Pescarolo hybrids left, right and centre, but what it can do is give, at the very least, a fantastic rivalry to literally any other prototype in the game, including that Pescarolo, including the Peugeot 908, the Audi R10, and all of the others, because it is that good. Now, it's not going to beat them all necessarily, but it's definitely up there with them, and with the right driver, it can beat them, because it has that innate potential. Now, in terms of Who I'd recommend this car for, because different prototypes definitely appeal to different types of driver, I would say that this is, funnily enough, somewhere between amateur and pro, because there are some prototypes which are very, very forgiving, very beginner friendly, something like the Zytek for instance. You don't have a huge amount of power to work with, very easy to drive. The Mazda LM55, of course, not technically an actual Le Mans racing car, but close enough in the Vision GT category. That car is very forgiving, and that's one of the reasons why it was so popular. Then you have others which are definitely more on the pro side. I would say one of the best examples is the Audi R10. It's just got such a massive amount of power, huge amount of torque, and it's very, very slippery and very leery if you don't know how to use it correctly, that it's most certainly a pro machine. This one is somewhere in between. It's not the most difficult thing around to drive, even in its fully tuned form, but because in particular of that truly massive amount of torque that it has, it spins up its tyres very easily. And in fact, in this race, you'll see me spin up the tyres on the exit of corners quite a lot. Now, of course, that's with well over 1,000 horsepower, and in plenty of lobbies, you wouldn't have that. I mean, you won't have that in any lobbies now because you can't even enter a lobby online, but you know what I mean. In career mode, for instance, with, say, a lower PP point level or lower power, it's much, much easier to handle. And the Bentley was always one of my personal favourites in the game because of just how good it was as an all-rounder. It looks good, sounds good, handles well enough to win, the acceleration is strong, but the funny thing about the acceleration actually is because it has so much, as I said, torque, even when you haven't upgraded the turbos, it feels slower than it actually is, which is funny because the torque is so lazy and so effortless that it just kind of wafts you along, especially mid-range. And that's not a bad thing, it's just not necessarily the most visceral of prototypes to drive. You drive something like a Peugeot 905 or a Mazda 787B and they feel every bit as fast as they are. They're loud, they're raw, they're hardcore cornering missiles. The Bentley just isn't like that. The Bentley's much more like the Audi R8, it's like the Peugeot 908, even though that's a diesel, in as much as it's smooth, it's cleaner, it's kind of understated, funnily enough, which I guess shouldn't be surprising from a Bentley in a general sense. But the fact that the car did win in real life speaks volumes. And of course, if a car can win in real life in much more difficult conditions than in a game, then surely it should be a great car in the game. And this one is. It's up there with other winners like the Sauber C9, the Audi R8 itself, and a number of others. It's definitely a top-tier contender. In terms of all-rounders, it's most definitely in the top 10 best prototypes in the game, maybe even top 5, and I would not be at all surprised if many people had this as their favourite prototype in the game. It's certainly unique. It's the only Bentley we've ever had in Gran Turismo, and if you're going to have a Bentley and only have one, I would argue it's a pretty nice one to go for. So personally, I really hope that they bring this car back. I would give it a ton of use in Group 1 in Gran Turismo, Sport in particular, or 7, and of course it would be a nice base for liveries as well. So yeah, I love the Bentley, I've always loved the Bentley, and I hope they bring it back. So tell me your thoughts down below. Are you a fan of the Bentley? Have you ever driven it? Maybe you haven't played the older Gran Turismo games. If you have though, you probably have some fond memories of this car. I haven't really heard any hate for the Bentley. People tend to either like it or just don't care either way. I don't hear much hate for it, and that's cool. That's always a good sign as well. But overall, that's it for this review. Of course, stick around on the channel for more retro throwback reviews to older Gran Turismo games, not just 6, but of course we cover even older ones as well, way back to the first and second game even. And for now, as always, thanks for watching.